Every person's story has something to teach us. How others view life, how obstacles are overcome, how joy is felt, how fears are faced, how love is expressed. The Matters of Faith podcast explores individual stories of people's lives and how faith plays a part. It may not be your story, but it may help shape yours. And now, Matters of Faith with your host, Jay Wilburn.
You have found the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network with your host, Jay Wilburn. This is the 200th episode, so we're going to try and do something special. Part of what I'm going to do today is go over my goals for 2021, and we are going to look at some clips from some past episodes that have been very, very important to me and that I've enjoyed. It was sort of a curse of riches. There was so much to share, and there were a couple episodes that I really just wanted to share the whole episode, so this whole 200th episode could have been 6-7 hours long, but I did contain myself, so I hope that you do enjoy it. Before we get into the episode, I want to remind everybody that the Matters of Faith at jwilburn.com email is where you can contact me if you'd like to advertise on the Matters of Faith podcast. Or if you have questions or comments, fill up that inbox and we'll take an episode to address some of those. And even before the episode, I'll communicate back and forth with you about those. When you advertise with this podcast, you get advertisements on the live stream that go out to everybody who follows on Twitch or jumps on live. You get a advertisement on the recorded video episode as well as the recorded audio episode. So that's a good deal for just a very little bit of money. So feel free to contact me and I can help you get your passions before our audience. Thank you for joining me for this 200th episode, and I look forward to sharing some of my favorite moments with you in just a moment. This is the Matters of Faith podcast on Project Entertainment Network, and this is episode 200. Very excited to have everybody here. To start out, we are going to look at my 2021 goals. If you are not following the Mondo Method podcast here on Project Entertainment Network, you should definitely do that. These goals are going to be shared on there as well, and the wonderful hosts Armand Rosamilia and Chuck Buda, both of who will be featured in clips on this episode. They are going to go over the goals of a number of writers, so you kind of get to see what several different people have set as goals. Many of them also set non-writing related goals, so it's good to jump in there and kind of see what everybody's doing and maybe what you would like to pursue in the year as well. Here on this episode, I'm going to take a look at my own goals. First, my publishing goals, I have these divided into, categories, and sometimes there's only one goal and then a stretch goal included with them, but it kind of divides up the things I'm trying to accomplish. My publishing goal for this year is to publish or have accepted for publication 4 books in 2021. Now, the fact is, in 2020, I had 10 books released. Now, a couple of those were bundles, so like the Maidens of Zombie Kingdom trilogy, I wrote all 3 of those books and published all 3 at once. I kind of looked at that as one release, but it's actually 3 books. And then the same thing with Time Travel Academy, which is a middle grades adventure series. I released the first 3 of those books all at once. Those were originally going to be a 2021 release, but early in the year, my sales were going pretty well, and I guess some people were home reading, and so there was a good bit of buying going on. So I went ahead and finished those books and put them out instead of waiting for 2021. I'm working on book 4 in that series now. And then in addition to that, we had some other books come out in different places, and so it ended up adding up to 10, even though that wasn't originally the plan to have all those books come out at once. So 4 seems like a small goal compared to having 10 the year before, but it's trying to go a little more reasonable. I'm not going to have 10 releases every year because that's not necessarily the best marketing strategy. 2020 was a little unusual in a number of ways. Now, my stretch goal for publishing goals is submit 4 stories for consideration by publishers this year. I can include anything from short stories up to novel length, and I do want to submit a few that may include some of those original 4 that are going to be either accepted or published. But it's very easy for me to self-publish all the time now, and so I'm kind of my stretch goal would be to put more work out there. I submitted a couple things this past year, and some were accepted, some were not, some are still being considered. But just want to put some more work out there to be considered by publishers, so I kind of stay on my game. Next category is platform goals. I have 2 in this category and then a stretch goal for each. So 2 different platforms I'm really focusing on to develop. Number 2, which is under a platform goal, have more supporters on Patreon at the end of 2021 than at the beginning. So looking day 1, I'll see how many supporters I have on there, and my goal is to have more than that at the end of the year. Seems like a small goal, but forward progress is the key. Now, my Patreon stretch goal, have 62 new short stories ready for October and December for Patreon. The last 2 years in October and December, I have had a story every day, so 31 stories in October, 31 stories in December. A number of those were new, but then others were ones that were pulled from the past of varying quality, and I put those out for people to enjoy. My goal this year, and especially since I'm doing a lot more writing on Twitch, I don't think this is completely out of the realm of possibility, is to have 62 new short stories ready for October and December this year. I think I'm well on track to do that. I've already got some written and scheduled for October. And so with the writing that I plan to do this year, I think I can reach that stretch goal. Now, again, not meeting that stretch goal merely means that I'll pull a few older stories to fill out those months, and hopefully I'll write enough to where I can share some more during the year. So if you support me on Patreon at patreon.com/jwilburn, you'll see a couple novels each month that's going to be going on in 2021, and you'll see short stories each month. I'm going to share some from my Young Reader series, and videos will be on there, and previews of blog posts and other things. So my goal is to make, well, these are my goals, but the underlying effort to reach these goals is going to include having some robust content on that Patreon page, so that people are getting their money's worth for $1 or more a month. So anyone interested in supporting me there, I'm going to do my best to make that worth your money. My third goal, and this one also under the platform goals, have more followers on Twitch at the end of 2021 than at the beginning. Again, I've seen some growth on there, and I'm excited about it. I'm seeing more people jump into the chat and talk to me while I'm working on stories and doing other types of commentaries and readings. So I think that's a reachable goal, and I also think it's reasonable. I don't want to set an arbitrary number and then not do that. I'd rather my focus be on creating good content and then continuing with that as we go forward. My Twitch stretch goal is to achieve affiliate status on Twitch. So that's sort of the first monetizing level on that platform. And there's a few things I'm able to maintain a number of those goals, but the number of people watching average is the one that'll need to come up, and that'll improve as more people are added on, as I continue to produce good content and so forth. So that's a stretch goal, and I believe that working to do my best on that platform will get me closer to reaching that if I can stretch that far this year. My reading goals for this year, actually I'm going to go ahead and read it and then I'll explain it. Number 4 in my goals underneath the reading: complete the rest of Stephen King's books for my Stephen King Revisited reading before the end of the year. My reading stretch goal: begin my Brian Keane Revisited reading and posts before the end of the year. So I think both of those goals are achievable. I actually, as the pandemic started and I was going along, I felt time kind of close on me because, of course, being in a vulnerable population with the transplant and the immunosuppression and the breathing issues and all the things that would make me catching COVID terrible, I felt the shortness of time. And I'd been working on reading all of Stephen King's books in order for a long time, with many gaps in between where either I would be reading something else or I would just be busy with other things and would never get around to reading them. And so I figured out how many pages were left in all those books, and I figured out how many days were left in the year, and it came out to where I was going to have to read something like 115 pages per day. At the moment, where Stephen King is, and it depends on volume, but roughly if you read 108 pages a day, you could read all of Stephen King's books in a 365-day year. I'm further along now, but keeping up a 115-page pace every single day or averaging that every day was a little beyond me. So I kept catching up and then falling back behind and then falling desperately behind. And then there would be days where I would be discouraged from reading because I was so far from the goal that I knew I wasn't going to make it. So it was actually a little counterproductive. I am trying to push myself to read consistently and more to get more of those books done. I blog before and after each of the books, telling what I remember from before and then what I pick up after reading it again, or in some cases reading it for the first time. I think it's reasonable for me to go ahead and finish that in this next year. And then I've been buying up Brian Keane's books, and I'm going to do the same thing with his catalog, reading all the books by Brian Keane that are available in order of roughly in the order of publication. So I believe I can meet both of those goals, the regular goal and the stretch goal, before the end of the year. Next goal, number 5, is in the legacy goal category. It's finish cataloging all the stories I've written along with publishing and submission histories and maintain that record. I have 2 stretch goals for this. Legacy stretch goal 1, establish an online archive with all stories and story details attached that is organized and can be accessed by select people for legacy purposes. And then legacy stretch goal number 2, don't know if I'll meet this one this year, find a person to be in charge of literary legacy. I'm not sure who that would be. I would definitely connect my wife to the online archive so that she has access to it should anything happen. But obviously there would need to be someone younger who's actually interested in what I do that would be willing to take that on. I'm not sure I have someone like that in my life right now, but we'll see how that goes. But definitely I want to finish cataloging them. I've already started and I'm well on my way. And so I'm having to pull from a bunch of different sources to get like all those stories listed off. And then on Trello, I'm making cards for each of the stories and actually putting all the information in there and then attaching the file of the story itself there. So at some point, a person could just go into that website and look at all the stories in alphabetical order, be able to access them to see where they've been published, what they're about, what the word counts are on them, and then even be able to download the story directly from that source. So that's something that I'll be really proud of once I get finished, and I believe I can do that this year. My final goal for 2021 is a health goal, number 6 out of all my goals. Cover 365 miles this year through a combination of walking, running, and biking. I could actually go further than that, I'm pretty sure. There was a separate challenge that we had considered that was sort of 2,021 miles for 2021. That came out to a really sort of high, ridiculous number. So I didn't want to overshoot, and then also not knowing what this year may hold, and there may be a surgery in my future this year. And so I just wanted to be sure that I put down a goal that I could reach. Now, I considered making 2,021 miles my stretch goal, but separately I decided to make a goal that was a little bit related but different from that. And my health stretch goal is going to be able to complete a 40-minute 5K before the end of the year. I've done that once before, but I've had a little bit of a deterioration in my endurance and other physical issues and things like that. So I'm kind of working to get back to where I was at one point. And of course, the older you get, the tougher that gets. But as a stretch goal, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility, but it would definitely be a stretch for me. So we'll see where we go with these goals this year. Beyond the goals this year, I really want to share some clips that were some of my favorites from this year. So I'm going to talk, between each clip, I'm going to talk about the guest. With 200 episodes, there's a ton, even going way back before I was doing this on video as well as audio. But I kind of limited myself to a few. It may still end up being a long episode, but I'll try not to jabber too much in between the clips. The first couple clips come from Armand Rosamilia and his episode. He talks about words being the most important thing as a writer, just producing the words. And then we also pick up where he talks about paying it forward, where he helps out other writers. So let's take a look at what Armand Rosamilia had to say on those topics. You and I have talked about this a good bit, and especially since we're both full-time writers, there's always been a part of you that's tried to sort of hold on to that desperation like early in your career when you were sort of writing for your life, basically, where it was, you're trying to make income and trying to pay bills and all that kind of stuff. Just from that, there's always been a part of you that even when things started to get more stable, when you were full time and that kind of thing, you seem to try to cling to that sort of desperate feeling as a way to drive you. Talk about that a little bit in terms of, what that was like as you went forward, and if that's still a part of sort of your writing persona now.
I hope it is part of it. I hope it's not manufactured or in my head at this point, because it does help. I mean, obviously I always say the best thing for me is, like, I just did a guest block for somebody about writer's block, and I said I don't have writer's block because the alternative is going back to retail management. It's that fear of I have to get a 9 to 5, and at this point in my life, I don't think I can do it. I mean, I don't think mentally there's any, physically probably even, there's no way I can do those hours and work like that. So that's part of it. But then I also look at, it's kind of like my life is kind of like the Rocky movies, and I feel like I'm in Rocky 3 or 4, where he's rich and he's not even really training, and he's just like kind of going through the motions. And that's, at points, that's what it's like. It's like I will go through points where I will finish a couple things and I'll be like, this is good enough. And then I need kind of that kick to go, you know what? I need to write more. I need to keep up my daily average. I need to keep doing my sprints. That's the most important. And my wife will yell at me every now and then and say, stop with the social media. Stop with the promoting, all the other stuff, because you won't have anything to promote if you're not finished with this book.
Right.
So she's pushing me to, words are the most important thing. And my fiscal year just ended. So it's I ended up with 455,000 words I wrote in the last 12 months. And my goal was 400,000. So I did an extra book this year than what I wanted, which is great. And I think it's that push. It's I need to find that drive.
You spend a lot of time connected with the podcast, but then on your own as well, where you are reaching out to other authors, mentoring, talking other people through some of their struggles, sometimes personal, sometimes professional. What is it about what you've been through, or the way that you want to live that causes you to so deliberately play that role for so many different authors?
I think I'm a big believer in karma. I'm a big believer in what you put out there, you're going to get back. And I was very lucky. So this will be my 8th or 9th year of full time, being able to write and make a living. But I mean, my first short story was released when I was in high school in 1988. So there's a lot of time in between. And in the beginning, I was on my own. There was no other authors in my area. There was no internet. There was none of that. And when I started to get serious, and I saw like J.A. Conrath and Scott Nicholson are the two guys that always come up for me, because they answered all my questions. And most of my questions were ridiculously stupid. And they really had a lot of patience with, here's this new kid who was probably the same age as them. But they had done a lot of success with some major publishers at that point in their career. So I was able to do that, and I remember basically being told more or less by both of them of, because I would say, what can I do? What can I do to help or whatever? And their thing was, pay it forward. Someday, hopefully you'll be in a position to help other authors. So that was kind of, for me, that was part of that. So about a month ago, I had Alexander C. Bailey, is his official writing name, Alex from Iowa, was having kind of a rough personal patch, and my wife said, we'll buy you a plane ticket, and why don't you just come here for a couple weeks? And I said, I'm going to put you through the Rosamilia boot camp, the writing boot camp. And it was great for me because it kept me in the chair every day. And it was a leading by example, but it was also, here's this kid who's literally half my age. And he has so many questions, and he's just starting out. And I was able to give him all of the good and bad that I've done in my career. And he did great. I mean, he was killing it with stories, and he still is weeks later. We just had a conversation this morning about a couple of upcoming anthologies. And for me, that's awesome. I mean, a couple other authors I'll talk to every other Saturday morning or Sunday morning and share some of my stories. It's talking shop, which I love. And so it's all that, and it's just really just helping. And I share a ton of books on Twitter like you do. And so for me, it's just really, it's a positive. There's so much negative, especially online. And so I just focus on helping other authors, and other authors have in turn helped me as well. So that's the fun of it.
Wesley Southard was good enough to join us for an episode and had a lot to share. He's had some big successes in his career coming up recently. We talked about some of that broadly in the episode. He's had some setbacks personally recently, and even as I'm recording this, he was fighting off a case of COVID. So my great hope is that that works out for him fine, and that he moves on without any permanent issues that come from that. In the clip we're about to share, he talks about good and bad experiences that he had with editors.
Okay, here's a story. Here's a good story.
Right.
If you've read Resisting Madness, my short story collection, like you talked about at the beginning, I talk about in the story notes for a story called By the Throat, about how that was supposed to be my first published short story, and it technically was. I had sold a couple of others. I sold a short story about like in 2009 or 2010 to an anthology that ended up shitting the bed and dying. Like the whole press just died. So I ended up selling, By the Throat to a publisher, and I was going to have copies that I was going to take with me to Horror Find in Gettysburg, PA in 2010. So I was going to have all these copies I was going to sell, my first short story in this anthology, and I got it in the mail. I got my copies in the mail just to find out that the editor had rewritten my story from the first word of the story to the last word. He rewrote everything. I lost my shit. I was not, I freaked out. So I ended up emailing him saying, what gives you the right to do this? And I went off. And he basically countered with, well, what gives you the right to email me back and say all these things? Like, I'm the editor, I have the right to do all this. And, I know people who can prove you wrong and prove me that I'm right because I'm the editor. And I countered back, I said, not according to your contract, because I'm not an idiot. The contract says you can only make minor edits and not without my consent. So yeah, it was back and forth, and then I finally had him just take the story completely out of the anthology. It was awful. It was really, really awful. Called We Bear All. And I really, really like that story a lot because the editor worked with me a lot to get that story to where it's actually at right now. Because when I originally sent it to him, he liked it, but it just wasn't working. And I got kind of frustrated with that because I was like, well, I don't know what to do with this then. Like, I don't know what you want from me. So we kind of went back and forth, and he really helped me flesh this out and made it a much, much better story.
At the beginning of the show, you talked about one of your first editing experiences being terrible, and then
that was a edit.
Yeah, and then towards the end, you talked about one that was very positive, that you worked pretty deeply with to completely change a story. What does it take for you to have an editor that's willing to that you can work with to make big changes to something like that?
I haven't had a whole lot of that experience with that short story was very unique because usually I mean, with a lot of short stories, depending on the market, I guess, you send it in, and either they like it or they don't, and you just make like minor changes. Well, that one in particular was very different than what I've been used to, because I mean, he liked the story, but he wanted more out of it, and he didn't think it was working, or there was something missing from it, because I guess it was just too linear, it was too straightforward, and he wanted to know a little bit more about other things happening in it, and I got frustrated because I was like, well, I don't know if that's the story or not. Then I gave it a shot, and I was like, oh, okay, that is this story. I like what I'm doing now. So yeah, that was kind of a very unique thing, but a lot of the editing I've been used to is either like, you know, early on with these no-name, very micro boutique presses,
right,
that are just putting out anthologies over and over. A lot of them aren't even really editing. They'll just take the story and just throw it in the file and just be done with it. I mean, I sold a short story, God, back in like 2011, 2013 or something like that. It's like a brand new, it wasn't even an e-zine. It was like they were just selling like an ebook version of their magazine, and it was the first issue, and I ordered the issue. I couldn't even get a free damn issue of it, but I bought one, and I saw that they didn't take out the underlines in my story, because at the time I was always told that if you're doing something that needs italicizing, that you just need to underline that word, and the editor should go back and italicize it themselves. Well, they didn't do that. They didn't even take out the damn underlines. They left the underlines in the damn file, or in the final product. And I was like, this is some, like, just, this is crap. This is absolute crap. And I was so mad about that. And I remember at the time I was just so damn mad at it. But I think you just hope that, like, the publishers that you do work with in the presses do have good editing. I know Death's Head has a very good couple of regular editors that they use that they go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, which is really great, because it seems like no matter how many pre-readers you have, you know, you could have 6 or 7 pre-readers if you want that many, and then it seems like the 7th person is still going to find something that everybody else, you know, missed.
Right.
And that was the funny thing with Cruel Summer. I had like 5 pre-readers, and I thought they found everything. I thought it was as clean as possible. And then, funny enough, Bob Ford, who wrote the intro for it, for the hardcover, he read it, and he came to me with like a whole bunch more edits, and I was like, holy shit. And then someone else found more stuff, and I was like, oh my God, like, you can have 10 people read something, and number 11 is still going to find something that the other 10 people missed. It's so frustrating. But yeah, that's one thing. If you're a new author or a newer author, get pre-readers. Pre-readers are very, very important. I know that may not be for everybody. So I know people that don't like pre-readers. I know people that just they don't like that those extra eyes on stuff, and that's whatever. But I've always said you need pre-readers. You need other people catching your mistakes and calling you out on it, and asking questions. You know, wait, this doesn't make sense. Can you elaborate more on this? And I had that. I had that with Cruel Summer. I had 5 different people read it, and I had 5 different people asking questions and finding shit that I missed. And yeah, it's editing is incredibly important.
This next clip will be of Sean Grigsby. I very much enjoyed being able to catch up with him. We've known each other for a while and have communicated online, but it had been a long time since we'd had an actual conversation. Everything I loved about that episode, and pulled several clips from it, but I'm going to share one clip from that episode on emotional investment.
I can't stick with a thing unless I emotionally invest myself into it. And so definitely from the firefighter standpoint, which I'm no longer a firefighter. I got out of it. Yeah, and it's funny because, like, I got to a point where it was like I cared less about firefighting and more about writing. Yes. Which it was always kind of there anyway. But it got to a point where it was just like, fuck it. This is what I was meant to do. I loved the job of firefighting, not some of the assholes I worked with. A few of them I liked, but I can't write anything unless I'm emotionally invested into it. And I love pulp. I love the adventure, the excitement, and the shit. Look at some of the like people's favorite movies.
Right.
Their core like touch my heart, string of whatever. They're not talking about Dangerous Liaisons or whatever the fuck. They're talking about Indiana Jones and The Princess Bride and that kind of thing. And I've loved that my whole life. That's the kind of stuff I've loved, but I also didn't want to write crap.
Yeah.
I didn't want to just like, oh yeah, like just some extended Gears of War. Well, that's not a bad. That's a horrible example. Gears of War has good emotion, but like some weird like the Small Soldiers.
Yeah.
Remember like the commercials in the movie, like writing an extended version of that. I didn't want to do that. There is a lot of emotion involved in being a firefighter. You're away from your family, or at least you're off time if you're single, but yeah, your family too, for at least a third of your life. You see things that nobody even realizes happens on a consistent basis. Mm-hmm. You kind of like peer behind societal's curtain. And it fucks a lot of people up to look behind that curtain. It did me, but I looked behind the curtain when I was 7 years old. So it's weird how you become numb after working a job like that. Because you have to go into work mode. My wife is a nurse, and it's the same for her. She was in ICU.
Right.
You don't have the choice to freak out.
Yeah.
Because everyone's looking to you to do something, and we need people like that. But that's not to say that you're impenetrable and Superman
right.
and all that shit. Emotionally it'll fuck you up. Horrible stuff. I guess I'm the type of person to where in the moment it's like, hey, whatever, this is my job. But that shit piles up.
Right.
It grows, and then at a point you're like, wow, yeah, I'm done with this. But I like writing. I like when people talk a lot before, when I was kind of coming up, when I heard people talk about putting emotion into the writing, I thought it was that like sappy shit that I didn't like in books. That's not what they meant.
Yeah.
At least that's not what I believe. It's the truth. It's like how you view the world, what you're feeling about a certain thing. And that's the thing about certain books, especially a lot of books on the Times bestseller list, is that they all reach a line that I call the line of gooberishness, where it goes from feeling real and true and also entertaining to just being this like cliche, bullshit. And it always happens. It's like the first 3 chapters are great, and then they switch. But I'm still learning about that kind of stuff and figuring out. But I've always said writing is like therapy for me.
D. Alexander Ward has always been a person that I've felt close to in the writing industry, but then also as a person. And some of my favorite memories of conventions are when we just kind of hung out and talked, especially early in the morning when most people were still sleeping. So it was always fun to catch up with him when we had the opportunity. And as he and I both went through struggles in life, we've been able to sort of connect over that, I think. And I very much enjoyed discussing all of that in his episode of the podcast. The clip that I picked goes into the idea of resurrecting a trunk story. And again, a trunk story is sort of a novel or short story that you've kind of set aside and haven't touched for a while. It hasn't really gone anywhere yet. And then he discusses bringing one of those novels out and then trying to make it into something that he considered worthy to share.
On the Flesh, I can't tell you how many times it's been edited, because it's what everyone says. Your first novel should be your trunk novel. Write it and then throw it in the trunk and forget about it. Well, I tried to do that with Pound of Flesh. I wrote it the first time back in 2012.
Oh, wow.
And, I had it edited by a couple different people. I've changed. It was extraordinarily long at the time. There, it was like 189,000 words or something. I don't know. It was
wow.
Blah blah blah. I'm like, oh my god. So I learned the value of cutting a lot of it out, and over the years, like I just kept doing something with it. I rewrite it, edit it down, fix. Just kind of try and improve the writing as I improved as a writer. And then I'd just kind of walk away from it. And then, a year later, I'd be like, man, really like to see that one go somewhere and do something because I can't get the story out of my head. So I just kept at it until I got, like I said, I put it in front of Pete at Bloodshot, and he liked it and said he wanted to put it out there. So I'm, again, just still trying to make it the best it can be, and I'm super sensitive about it because I do feel like it requires a little bit more work than something that I would write right now from a fresh start, because I do kind of have to go back and fix some of the just not that the writing was bad per se back then, but it's just different from me now. However, I also believe it's important to kind of preserve that older voice that I had,
right?
Because I mean, it's a very, as you've read it, so you kind of have an idea, but it's a real kind of it's not an odd book. It feels to me like a kind of a love letter to the horror that I grew up on.
Mary SanGiovanni is an author that I very much enjoy and very much respect. I think more people should know about her. She has a lot to say in her work, and then in the depth of conversations that you can have with her on a number of topics. Pulled several great clips from that episode when it first aired. One of the ones that I really enjoyed was talking about how she got into comic books, not just as a reader of comic books, but specifically being able to write comic books. And in this particular clip, a special guest joins in, or maybe intrudes, depending on your point of view. But he definitely had something to contribute about comic books as well.
It was prior to doing the Wonder Woman story, I had never done any comics before. I barely have ever even read comics prior to that. Brian is a huge Brian Keane and I live together. He's a huge comic book fan, and I mean, to say the least.
Right.
And he's tried to get me to read comics before, and as far as the superhero stuff went, I speak of the devil.
Yeah.
Hi, Jay. Hi,
hey, Brian.
Audience. I heard comic books. Who wants to talk comic books?
Comic books? If you can see this is his. It's not even a fraction.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
not
I'm
even
aware.
a pinch of his collection.
28 long boxes.
It's craziness. And he's tried to get me to read comics, and he's tried to find ones that he thought I would like. But when this DC thing happened, they said, he had talked to Keith Giffen, who was overseeing this project, and Keith Giffen is a fascinating and funny man. He was great to work with, but if you've ever seen Guardians of the Galaxy, the raccoon in Guardians of the Galaxy. That's Keith Giffen. That's his personality, absolutely. So he can be a little intimidating, But he was great, and he'd read some of my books, and he wanted me to give the Wonder Woman a shot and do a story for that. And he said, basically just here's basically kind of the concept we're going for. And just give me what you got. And so I said to Brian, I said, this is so great. What do? I don't know how to write a comic book script. And he gave me a basic template for how comic book scripts are written.
Right.
And he told me, and I always think of this, if like the few graphic novel things I've done since then. I always try to remember this, is that if you are looking at, say, like a 3-minute action sequence, a comic is all the most important stills from that action sequence. You can't have somebody say, climbing up a ladder and jumping on the top. Like, that would have to be two different actions. You can only show one action per panel, but you can be creative with it, and you can do almost anything you want to using the background and the foreground and the facial expressions, and how close is the camera, quote unquote, to the person's face or to the action going on. Where do you want the focus to be? All that is up to the scriptwriter, and it was such a different type of writing.
Yeah.
But it was fun. It was fascinating and fun to be able to tell a story in such a different format. And so I would write out like this is what's going on in this panel. This is what the people say, and Keith said it was scary. He said in fact, I believe what he said was, "Oh my God, Brian, you let her sleep next to you at night." So I appreciate that. And the one nerve-wracking thing though is that I know that comic book folks, maybe more so than any other fandom, are very serious about their beloved characters.
Right.
And they are either going to love what you do or tear into you like demons from hell. And I was a little nervous about that. I was a little nervous about taking such an iconic figure and putting her in a situation where she's not really a good guy. No. She's kind of this sort of terrifying Amazon spirit that is tired of being, of any kind of oppressive society, whatsoever, and is in the body of a woman who, although they're not specific about it, because it was it had to do with certain editorial policies, I guess, but a woman who's maybe questioning her own sexual identity and her own gender, and to have this spirit inside her who was so adamantly against men oppressing women in any way. It was an interesting story to be able to tell, and it was fun. It was fun because, to tell you the truth, ever since I did the Wonder Woman story, I was like, I kind of want to do more comics. But I told them, I've told them before, they have my name, they have my contact information. If they ever want me to do any comics, I would be happy to. But I think it part of it's going to depend on how DC rearranges internally, their workforce.
Yeah. As a fan of those characters, and then of course being a horror fan, I loved that book, like all the stories, and especially including yours. Writing Wonder Woman as a first comic book is quite a deep end dive into comics.
Yes.
But it's funny because I read that book, and I'm sure they were going for something great, but as I'm reading through it, it almost felt to me like they accidentally did something great. Like they accidentally picked the best authors, not realizing what they were going to get, and then accidentally let them play a little more than they probably would have had they thought it out more. And so, like, in the end, you got what I think is an excellent comment that a few of the working elements were accidents. So, and I guess you mentioned, like, he thought your story was scarier than he expected, even though he's hiring horror authors to write a horror comic, and
that's partly my fault. I misunderstood what he'd said, because he said, go wild, do whatever you want to. And so they're actually, what I turned into him the first time was actually, it had to be edited down a little for violence, because I turned in maybe like an M comic and he wanted like a T comic.
Right.
So it did have to, I guess there are certain rules that DC puts in place about, like, content, violence, and, that kind of thing, controversial type topics and whatnot. But I think you're right. I think with the project, Keith said, this is an idea I have. This is what I want to do. Shut up, trust me, it'll work. And DC said, okay, all right. But I think that the feeling maybe above Keith's head was, well, they're not comic book writers, so comic book people aren't going to respond to what they're doing. And Keith said, you need to trust me. They're horror writers writing a horror comic. It'll work. And I think it did.
It definitely did.
I think it was, I think he picked writers whose work he knew, and he gave them something that he believed they could do, but would still be somewhat challenging.
Now, in that clip, we had a cameo of Brian Keane, but in the next section, we're going to feature Brian Keane. The episode 169 that he was in, we had some very deep conversations about faith and philosophy and the nature of the universe, and that was the majority of the episode. At the beginning and end of that episode, I had kind of fanned out on him a little bit because he's one of those authors that I was reading before I ever seriously considered becoming a professional author myself. So I took the opportunity in speaking to him on the episode to ask him a little bit about his career and specifically some of the connections I had with his work going way back. All right, now if you'll indulge me a second, as I'm sure I mentioned in the introduction, I'm a big fan of Brian Keane and have the opportunity to really meet him and get to know him well over the years as we've been to conventions together. But just to kind of illustrate the range of that connection, I want to describe my office just a little bit. So it's not a big room. It's like 12 by 8, and most of it's the desk that I write at on the computer, and then 2 pretty tall shelves that contain like all the copies of my books that I sell online and at conventions. Then 2 walls are the windows, and there's this single built-in shelf that runs the full length of those 2 walls, so 12 feet, and then the corner and another 8 feet. So most of that 12-foot wall is like all the books written by Stephen King in order. So that's most of that 12-foot wall. Then I got other trinkets and stuff in between, and there's some zombie books that run sort of the rest of the way to that corner and then around the corner, and then some other books, and then most of my books are in the actual bedroom. But in the middle of all those zombie books, I got some Bentley Little stuff, and I got some Brian Smith stuff, all of this that I bought well before I was even thinking that writing professionally was an option. And then there's some Brian Keane books in the middle there, and one of them is the paperback of The Rising. And The Rising came out in 2003, but the paperback I bought would have been around 2004, like the leisure paperback.
Yep.
And so right in front of me, I have The Triangle of Belief, which I bought off Amazon here in the middle of the pandemic, and it got here in a fairly timely manner. And then to my right, I can see that Rising book that I bought back in 2004 when writing professionally was barely even a dream of mine. So that's kind of how far my reading of Brian Keane circles around. So it's very exciting to have you on the show today.
That's pretty cool, man. That's pretty cool. I'm kind of surprised that my books aren't in the bedroom with you.
Well, trying to categorize here a little bit. So you're on the same shelf with Stephen King, so that's pretty good, I think.
I'll take that.
Pictures that I've seen of you from the past that I found like really fascinating was there's this picture, I believe you're at a convention, and you're it's right after The Rising came out and was starting to find success, and you're kind of sitting there among your peers and you're holding a newspaper article about The Rising and its success, so you're kind of reading about yourself in the midst of these peers. Yeah. Now, if that guy in that moment, that's sort of the first thing and the first big moment, if who you were then was looking forward and seeing sort of you at this moment with Triangle of Belief and End of the Road and that kind of thing, how does that guy process that journey to what you eventually became?
I don't think that guy would be able to process it. I mean, I remember that moment that you're talking about because it's to this day, it's still one of the wildest moments of this career. The article was the New York Times. They did a big multi-page spread about myself and J.F. Gonzalez and Tim Levin and how horror fiction was, back again. I think it was 2004, 2005 when that came out. And I was at a convention in Phoenix, Arizona, and Michael Berryman, the actor from The Hills Have Eyes, one of my favorite horror films when I was a kid, he had actually gone to a newsstand at like 3 a.m, Arizona time, and found that copy of the New York Times and brought it back to the hotel. And I'm sitting there reading it with, authors like Tom Piccirilli, Jeff Cooper, who we mentioned earlier, Rath James White, who we mentioned earlier. But also with us are, like Ken Faree from Dawn of the Dead and Reggie Bannister from the Phantasm movies. I mean, these are, George Romero was there. These are people whose movies I grew up idolizing. They were a big part of why I wanted to do this in the first place. And the fact that they all gave a shit enough to, send Michael out to go find that New York Times, there's still a part of me, my God, over 20 years later, that still just can't believe that actually happened,
Yeah.
So I don't know that I could have told that guy, that guy back then, he was a much different person than who I am now. And I think if I could travel back through time and warn him about everything that's going to happen, I don't think he would have believed me.
Yeah.
Which is heartbreaking, but I think you've got to walk through the fire,
right,
in order to understand how bad the fire is.
This year, I also had Summer Cannon on and enjoyed her episode very much. There was a lot of great information about her process and the things she went through to get to where she is now. One of the things that really stuck out to me is one of the clips where we talked about short stories. And many things she said have stuck with me since that episode. But the things she said about short stories have been something that I've thought about and applied as I've continued writing short stories this year.
I'll do one big project at a time. I do a lot of anthologies, so I'll do like one big project, but then I'll work on a short story, because when I do short stories, my short stories are short. They're usually no longer than 2,000 words, so I can, slip one of those into the whole process in the meantime.
Writing short stories is kind of a lost art. People are kind of getting in the habit of writing longer short stories these days. How often are you writing short stories? Is it sort of a constant thing, like you're rolling to one to another, or?
Not quite constant, but it does sort of sometimes feel like a deluge of, requests or invites, which I'm very flattered that I'm at that point where I get emails, hey, we're putting out this anthology, do you want to submit? And it's like, oh, yay, I'm part of the family now, yay! But it does happen a lot where I had to turn one down, and I still feel really bad about it, but I was in the middle of like 5 different things at the time. But I really, really, really love writing short stories. I've always been a fan of anthologies and collections. I think short stories really show a writer's mettle. I've found that if you can write a fabulous short story, everything else you write tends to be really great too. So that's one of my favorite ways to become acquainted with new authors, is through anthologies and things like that. And I've found that, not that I'm not bragging about myself, but I have fun writing short stories. I have fun, knowing where to leave the reader hanging, and it's my own little sadistic side.
How does the process differ for you, like when you're creating a short story versus a longer work?
It doesn't really differ. Okay. I'm a pantser. I'm not really an outliner. I think that with short stories, it'll tend to be like, with one of my longer works, think of it like a cake. The short story is just a piece of that cake. But instead of cut out in a wedge, it's the piece cut out in the very center.
Writing a 2,000 word, like consistently coming up with 2,000 word short stories, implies some sort of organization, even if it's just mental. Like if you're a pantser, but you kind of have an idea what the story's about, how quickly do you get to the point where you realize where the story's going to begin and end and all that?
I have to sit and think about stuff for a little bit. I have to let it cook for a little bit before I actually sit down and write out that first sentence. So by the time I've actually sat down and started on it, it's been in the works in my head for a little while. I just sort of go with it. I know the very basic things that I want to happen, and then it's just basically working that out in the keyboard. It is very basic. The thing that's most important is knowing how it ends, knowing the climax. And once I've got that, honestly, the rest of it's pretty easy.
Do most of your short stories tend to be horror, or is that sort of a place where you play with other genres?
I tend to make them horror. I think some of the most devastating stuff that I write tends to be in my short stories.
Lucas Mangum has appeared on the Matters of Faith podcast twice. In the first episode, we talked more specifically about faith and then got into his work a little bit. And in the second one, we were talking more about a book that he had coming out. Before the episode was over, we discussed collaborations, and he mentioned a few, including one that's out now. So I picked that particular clip to share from Lucas's most recent appearance.
And it was, we have a lot of the same tastes as far as movies and books go, and we were corresponding pretty heavily before and after KillerCon 19, and he had just read my collection, Engines of Ruin, and there's 2 zombie stories in there, and we were talking about zombies and how cool it would be to do a something that was more along the lines of Demons and Demons 2, the Italian horror films.
Oh, okay.
And I had just got done watching both of them, and I was like, yeah, I was thinking the same thing, instead of like a movie theater or a haunted apartment complex, I love wrestling, and I would love to do like maybe an underground wrestling show where crap hits the fan, and we just got talking, and we were emailing back and forth, and just the excitement just kept building. And it just came to this point where it's like, okay, so I'm going to write 8,000 words, and then I'll kick it back to you, and you can write as much as you want to write, because Ryan loves to write.
Well, he's good at it.
He's amazing at it. I've got to be honest, I don't know, his book, Genital Grinder in particular. If somebody came up to me and was like, read my book, Genital Grinder, I'd be like, really? but he's just got a flair for words and sentences, and I just really like the way he writes. And so it was a really nice balance, because I write in a very clipped minimalist style, and he's very immersive, and so I think we were able to kind of create something that meshes both of our styles, and I think people will really enjoy that one. And with Shane, full disclosure, Shane is like one of my best friends. Like, our kids hang out,
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And he's been doing a lot of screenwriting lately, but every KillerCon, he's just like, man, I really miss writing books. And this past one, the virtual one, I was just like, well, I miss your prose too, and why don't you James Patterson me, send me an outline, and I'll, and that's what it started out as, but now it's kind of this thing. We have a publisher interested, which is why I can't really talk about, but it's kind of become this thing that we're both taking very seriously, and we've got the first 6 books planned, and this
that's big.
Yeah, it's called Razor Candy is the line, and it's standalone horror stories in this kind of goosebumpy kind of brand, I guess.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
I'm definitely going to check that out. We mentioned the 2 collaborations. Is there anything that you're working on that may be coming out in the nearish future besides those 2?
Not really. I actually don't have anything solo in the works right now.
2 collaborations is a lot of work, so I imagine that's taken up your time.
Yeah, it is, and especially Shane is man, he is he's. I'm always learning from that guy,
Oh yeah.
Just yeah. Which so it's Yeah, it's definitely, he's very meticulous when it comes to structure and theme, whereas I tend to I think I tend to eventually get there, but for the most part, like, writing for me tends to be more of an exploratory process. So this is like definitely taking up a lot of headspace trying to figure out, like, how to work together, and it's all good because we're like having fun doing it, but it's definitely immersive.
Well, I was about to say, when you pick two heavy hitters to collaborate with, I imagine you're kind of challenged to bring your A game to both projects.
Exactly.
You're not making it too easy on yourself there.
No. And the Ryan thing, we finished that last year, and it's like, but yeah, we're still talking about it, exciting ways to promote it, because it's like, I feel like horror and wrestling have always been kind of these weird bedfellows, and I'm like, I know there's crossover potential in there somewhere, but and of course, the haters will be like, well, wrestling fans don't read, and I'm just like, yeah, they do. They read wrestler autobiographies. Come on.
Max Booth III has been an important part of my entire writing career professionally, before and after I went full time. I enjoy his writing as an author, and me as the reader. He's put out some amazing stuff. He has a movie coming out soon, and I've just been amazed by what he's accomplished, even before other people started to pick up on it. I was fortunate enough to have him on the podcast, and I knew a good bit about his past. So if you get a chance to jump on that episode, you'll definitely want to, because there's a lot of great insight into how he got to where he is. One of the aspects that touched me was when he talked about rage being contagious and why he decided to move. And so I wanted to share that particular clip from his episode. What made you move to Texas? Like, why Texas?
I had friends who also lived in Texas, and I had no other friends who lived in any other state, so I thought, well, that's a good place to leave. I mainly just wanted to get out of Indiana. That was my main goal.
Now, I've always found it curious because you're a fairly liberal guy. And so, like, Indiana was probably not the best fit for you. But then you're like, is there a state that's more conservative than Indiana that I can move across the country and live in? And so that's what you did. So you've always kind of lived in conservative states. Do you just like being surrounded by that opposition?
I mean, thinking back on it now, I don't think I realized other states were different until I was a little bit older than that. I mean, growing up, I didn't even realize other news stations existed besides Fox News. I never really realized my dad was considered conservative until recent elections. Then I thought, oh, wait, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Despite the fact that growing up, I've always had a strong distaste for the massive racism in my family. They love a good black joke, I'll tell you that, man.
Yeah.
But it didn't. I mean, I always thought this doesn't sit right with me, but I just you just go along with it because it's family. You don't think too much about it. So yeah, and then I moved to Texas, which is mostly the same, except we have more guns in Texas. I didn't see so many guns in Indiana, but yeah, quite a few here.
What do you think caused you to be sort of the polar opposite of your family members in so many ways?
I think being the youngest helped. My family has an issue with rage that I witnessed from a really young age. My brothers and my mom would often fight a lot physically, and my mama loved to slap the shit out of them in really violent ways whenever they would talk back. Now, when I say my brothers, I mean I have three of them. All of them are half brothers. The oldest one is, I want to say, like 20 years older than I am. That's on my dad's side. He'd never lived with us when I was alive, at least. And my other two brothers on my mom's side, one is 12 years older than I am, and one is 11 years older than I am. So, I mean, there's a pretty big age gap between them. By the time I came out of my mom, she had kind of cooled down with, like, the physical punishment with me, at least, but she would always she was pretty violent with my brothers, and that led, I believe, to them being violent with other people, including what did we decide to call those ladies that weren't quite wives, practice wives? Yeah. Especially my second oldest brother. He's a really violent man, has a lot of rage issues. I witnessed a lot of tragic incidents with him and the people around him who supposedly he loved. And I saw, I don't know, the incident that made me decide, okay, I have to leave this state because I believe rage might be contagious. Is a few weeks before I bought my bus ticket, I had a thing happen at the house. Well, my second oldest brother, he said something to my mom that made me actually black out. And by the time I realized what was going on, I was on top of him, and I was in the process of strangling him, and he was sobbing to let him go. And that terrified me to no end. And that pretty much sealed the deal that I had to get out of this place pronto. And I'm glad I did, because I definitely chilled out once I moved. And I noticed the Christmas after that, I went back home to visit, and immediately I had this fucking rage issue again, just being around my family. So I do think rage can be really contagious around family.
Chuck Buda is very dear to me, and he and me and Armand and several other people in the writing community, I think, have some close bonds. And was very excited to finally get him on the episode, and he was very gracious and is always talking about the authors that mean something to him. So I wanted to share a couple clips about some authors that he spoke highly of. Armand kind of plays a big role in your writing history. When did you first become aware of him as an author?
I knew he was an author because I listened to Armand Toof, his podcast with Mark Tufo. Because again, I was studying self-published authors, and he's hybrid, but they would talk about self-publishing and stuff like that. So he was part of my daily learning in terms of how to become a self-published author. So, I listened, and he had mentioned a few times, he was from Jersey and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. So, and the way he speaks, like he's just so down to earth and so like a normal guy, like a typical Jersey guy. So I was like, all right, he seems cool. I'm just going to like reach out to him, whatever, and just say, I like your stuff. And so I did that. Like I emailed him and said, hey, I'm from Jersey too. And, I'm a wannabe author. I have one book, but, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And he actually responded and pretty quickly. And he was like so cool. And so we just started talking through email, and we found that we had a lot of the same things. So, like he lived in Keyport. I used to hang out in Keyport because I had gone to high school near there, and I grew up down in a town close to Keyport. So, we had gone to a lot of the same places. We knew a lot of the same things. Found out that he was a metalhead like me, and he was going to Club Benet and the Fast Lane and the Stone Pony and places like that, and he was seeing metal bands like I was, and we were probably at the same shows because we were mentioning the same, so there were a lot of, I guess, parallels, and we just seemed to hit it off because we were both, typical Jersey guys. So on a lark, I just decided to, I think he was running a sale, or maybe it was Permafree or something like that, the Darlene Babbage, the first book in Dying Days. And So because it was free, I was like, what the hell? And I got it and I read it and I was like, wow, this is really cool, because it had his voice.
Yeah.
That, like, the same voice that he puts out on the airwaves through the podcast came through in the book, but yet it was still literature. It was still fiction. So I was like, wow. I was like, this is incredible. And so then I got the next book, and then I picked up something else, and I read Keyport Cthulhu, and of course, I was smitten with that book. I was just like, because I was a fan of Lovecraft, and to have somebody do Lovecraft but in Keyport where I grew up, I was like, holy crap, this is like the best thing I've ever read. It's still like one of my favorite books, just because of all that stuff coming together. And so I just started hitting him up even more, and I was just like, I'm a big fan of yours. I really like this stuff. I was like, I'm trying not to stalk you, but now I'm like really into you. And he played it cool and everything, but then he had a book signing in New Jersey, and it was his first. I guess it was Beers and Fears before it became Beers and Fears.
Right.
And he did a book signing in Belford, New Jersey, at Belford Brewing, and it was the first chance that I had to meet him in person. And it was like I was going on a date for the first time. So I showed up like 2 hours early. I was sitting in the parking lot in my car, like, my palms were sweaty, and I was like, oh my God, like, and I saw him and Shelley arrive and bring all the books into the brewery, and I was just like, oh my God, there he is, and all this stuff. Like, it went from being like this casual guy that I had nothing to lose, and I just wanted to, just like say hey, and I never even thought anything would come of it. And then all of a sudden I was like a gushing fan, and I showed up and I met him and I met his mother and all his friends and stuff, and he was just so kind to me and gracious, and he actually spent a lot of time at the signing talking to me when he had all these people that he already knew, and I was just like, wow, this guy is incredible. And Shelley was great, of course. I mean, I was like, what else do you have? I ended up buying, I think, like 20 books from him that day. And it was funny because he's like, well, I only have these 10 in here. And Shelley's like, well, there's more in the car. And I was like, yes, please. So, he always makes fun of me because I actually made Shelley go out to the truck and open the back, and we went through, and anything that he didn't have on the table inside, I bought a copy from the back of their truck. So I went home with a huge stack, and I was like, I love this guy, and I started reading everything, and then I followed him to Scares That Care because he kept talking about what a great convention it is, especially for aspiring horror authors to network and get to meet people and stuff. And I was like, oh, I got to go check this out. And so I went, and that's when I met you actually too.
Right.
And so many other people. And that was like the greatest weekend ever, and really started and reinforced a lot of this stuff. And you guys were so great to me. I mean, you guys put up with me basically following you around the whole weekend and allowing me to eat meals with you and everything. It was phenomenal. He knew my struggles of becoming a new author. He knew my goals and dreams, and he saw, I guess, a lot of the stuff that I was going through. He had already done and been through in his career. And so I made a comment at one point, typical me, imposter syndrome. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I'm with you and Jay and all these people. Like, this is incredible. This is like, I'm pinching myself. I don't belong here and all this stuff. And I think I said that like 4 or 5 times on the weekend.
Yeah.
And, there's certain things that you don't do. And one thing is piss off Armand. And so I guess that got under his skin. So he's like, come with me for a second. And I knew that something was up because there was a certain look on his face and there was a certain demeanor in his posture. And I was like, I was a little nervous because I was like, all right, I'm not sure, but I think he's upset. And so I was like, here we go. I finally bit the hand that feeds me. So, I was hovering around the table too much and everything. And he pulled me out to one of the vestibules in the hotel. And, I won't curse here, but he basically dropped all these curses in my face. And he was like, you do belong here. Shut up. I don't want to hear this anymore. you're one of us, act like it, or, you know, don't come around me anymore. And then he was like, I have a proposition for you. And he's like, and you can't say no. And I you know, because I'll break your legs. He's like, I want to do a new podcast about writing, and, you know, where I help, you know, he's like, I'm mentoring you now. He's like, but I'm going to mentor you on the air for other people. And, you know, so I can help you through stuff and other people can learn from it as well. And I said, you know what? I like my legs where they are and bending in the right position. So I'm going to do this. And plus, you know, I felt relief that he wasn't going to cut me loose for stalking him. So he was still very interested in helping me and showing me the way. And I said, you know what? This is great. I'm in. Let's do this. And we started. So, yeah, at first it was really about all the dumb things I was doing. And then he would be like, no, don't do that. That's dumb. And here's why. Because I was dumb and I did it before. And it was great because I learned a ton and it helped me. I'm going to hit it this month.
Oh, yeah?
I'm going to do it. Yeah. I am giving it my all. I know I'm behind, but I am not giving up. And I actually owe a lot to you. And I'm going to plug you because you need to be plugged. First of all, I'm a huge fan of your work too. Again, I didn't know who you were until I met you at Scares That Care. And then, you know, through our friendship and stuff, I started reading your work and I was like, you know, I still, as much as I'm a huge fan of Armand and Ed Lee and Brian Keane and all these other people, like, I still think pound for pound, you are the master storyteller.
Oh, wow.
You know,
thank you, man.
Out of everybody that I know. On so many levels, like, you know, you bring in characters and story, there's so much depth to the emotions, to the what's happening with the characters, to the plot lines, the subplots. I really do think that, you know, you're pound for pound like the best writer out there. But anyway, besides you being great at that, I also follow you on Patreon. And the fact that, and I can't believe you did it, but the fact that you write your NaNoWriMo online on Twitch on video and post it on Patreon, and then you do go through the word counts and stuff, and your inspirational messages and your motivation, I actually live for it, especially this month. And you know, sometimes I fall a few days behind because of work, but when I catch up and I watch the videos and I listen to you and stuff, it always gets me going again because, you know, I just always remember, again, going back to faith and what you've gone through in your life and still continue to go through. It reminds me that the struggle is real. And as much as I think that I'm fighting the uphill battle, I'm not doing a good enough job because people like you and like what you're going through and what you're still able to do, you know, raise a family, put out such tremendous content, help thousands of people, inspire, motivate. It's unbelievable. So anyway, thanks to you, I'm not giving up this month. I'm going to give it my all. I'm not going to stop until I get to the 30th. I may not get to 50,000.
Right.
But I'm damn well going for it, and I'm trying my best, and I'm going to hold my head up high, and it's because of you. Because,
thanks, man.
Because whether I get there or not, it doesn't matter. You know, we're going to talk about it on Mondo Method and everything else anyway. But it's what you basically leading by example and saying, you know, it's okay to be who you are. It's kind of like when Armand told me, you know, I was trying too hard at first to be Stephen King.
Yeah.
And I just didn't feel comfortable in my writing voice. And, you know, I learned that from him, from his voice and from him telling me, he's like, you're not Stephen King. Stop being Stephen King. You're Chuck Buda. Be Chuck Buda. And so that was a very telling, pivotal moment in my life. And the same with you is, you know, your constant message of live within yourself, be the best you can be, but but you have to have faith in who you are, in your process, in your dreams and goals, and just do it and move forward, and silence the rest and do your thing. And I've always believed that, I guess, intrinsically, but
right.
it takes your daily message to snap me back into it every day. And I'm so thankful for the message that I get from you on this podcast, regardless, but especially this month and through your Patreon, because it's really helped me tremendously, especially this month. So more people need to follow you on Patreon and Twitch. More people need to read your stuff, and more people need to listen to this podcast, because it's, I think it's your calling, it's your mission, and you're great at it.
Thanks, man. The final author we're going to look at today in clips is going to be S.A. Cosby. He is an excellent crime fiction author. My Darkest Prayer was awesome, and it was one of those books I recommended a lot when it came out. And then Blacktop Wasteland was great too, and that was the book that really got everybody's attention. Everybody who hadn't heard about S.A. Cosby already heard about him then. I was really pleased to have him on the program. He thinks very deeply about writing and a number of other things. This is another one of those episodes I could have just played the whole episode as a best of clip. But I pulled a couple sections, one about the South being a fertile ground for storytelling, and then a nice story that he kind of closed us off with in that episode about the greatest sound. And I think that's a good way to close out this episode as well.
I think it's the old, and I'm probably going to get this quote wrong, even despite how much I love it, but I think it's Faulkner's quote that goes, the past is never dead, it's not even the past. And I think that really, really influences, the literary tradition in the South. You can look at Southern horror writers, or Southern Gothic writers, because to me, Southern Gothic to me is horror writing with a conscience. It's horror writing in the back of the pew, in the last pew of the church. And so you look at you look at someone like Flannery O'Connor, or like even some of Eudora Welty stuff, and a lot of Faulkner stuff is grand Gunal horror, body horror to a certain extent, horror of the situation. It's not so much spectral or supernatural. The worst monsters in those stories are the people, regular, everyday people. You take a story like Revelations from Flannery O'Connor, where, this woman considers herself an upstanding Christian, and yet she looks at heaven and sees it segregated. So she finds, epiphany. She finds an epiphany in a pigsty. But I think for me, the thing that really, really sticks in my writing, and I've kind of dabbled a little bit in horror recently and messing around with some things, some ideas, is that the incredible, bloody, brutal history of the South leaves a stain on your soul. I think it's like a psychic curse that it goes from generation to generation. Sins of the fathers and mothers visited upon sons and daughters. I think you can see it, and also I think the atmosphere, the environment of the South. Hot summers. Humidity where it feels like the sun is a foot from your face. It creates this sort of speculative, spectral atmosphere. I've often said in reference to crime writing, but it's true about horror writing too. There are very few places that can be as scary as a dirt road in the country late at night with no moon in the sky. And so I think that it lends itself not only sociologically but emotionally to the distillation of psychic and supernatural horrors. So my day job is working at a family mortuary, and it's interesting. You talk about faith, and I have, to be perfectly honest, it's funny that I ended up here because I used to have a phobia of death as a kid. I used to have panic attacks as a kid. I saw people, and not violent death. I saw people. I grew up in a house where they had a lot of older people. When we moved in, my grandma, my grandpa was there. My grandmother's brother was there. My grandpa's sister was there for a while. My great grandmother was there for a while. So it was a lot of people in a little house. And so, I saw my great grandmother. I came home from school and she had passed, and I was the first person to get home because everybody else was at work. I was like 12. my great uncle, my grandmother's brother, unfortunately had a massive heart attack at the dinner table. And so, my next door neighbor, I went over to check on him. My mom asked me to go check on him because she didn't see any smoke coming from his chimney during a cold winter's night, and he had passed. And so, as a kid, I had a phobia. I used to have panic attacks. And a friend of mine, was telling me, you gotta just believe in God and believe in heaven and everything. And it was just hard. I think because I was a kid that was very inquisitive, and I'm the kid that's renting Grey's Anatomy from the library just to see it. I just want to look at it. And then like, oh, that's all inside of me? What the hell? And so I used to have a really big phobia about that. And so that my life journey brought me here is kind of ironic. You could say, a greater spirit brought me here to deal with those things, and kind of, and I'm still someone who is, it's funny, I'm bold and fearless when it comes to doing activities that could kill me. But then I don't like to think about the consequences, and that's something I had to be honest with. Like I used to have a motorcycle. I'm the first person to let's go to the beach and jump off this rocky ledge. Let's test drive this Dodge Challenger and see if we can get it to 180. And so it's kind of these contradictory visions in my life. But the one thing I've learned working here, and I'm not here as much as I used to be because the writing is kind of taking up a lot of my time, but I've learned that there's great comfort in faith. There's great comfort in community. And we come by, we walk by faith, not by sight. And, when you see somebody, a family here, to me, the biggest thing that I take away from is when you I have a family where the member that's passed was obviously loved. Because not always that way. Yeah. Not always that way. I've seen situations where it's very cold and very reticent, and people are like, it's a business transaction. But when you see somebody who is really loved, and the greatest sound to me is laughter inside of a funeral home. That's one of the most beautiful sounds because it tells you that person, those people are remembering that person, and that person was loved and they were cared for. And, no one knows what goes beyond this veil of wrath and tears. But I've got to hope and I've got to believe that those people, those good people, are there and they're waiting for us and watching over us. And I thought that before I had a recent passing in my family, and I hope that's the way it is.
Appreciate everybody following along with this episode. I hope you had as much fun with it as I did. I want to thank everyone, not just for coming on for this episode, but for all the 200 episodes we've had so far. Bigger than that, I want to thank everyone for the kindness that you've shown to me individually and as a group with social media, buying books, supporting me on Twitch, supporting me on Patreon, and everywhere. I hope that the conversations we've had here have been uplifting to you, encouraging to you, inspiring to you. I love stories, whether I'm writing them or just interviewing people to get them. And my greatest desire is that the stories we produced with this podcast and from my own head with my writing, that they impacted you in some way. I'm grateful for the opportunity to tell stories. And for however many more days we have together, I'm going to appreciate that. And for this, I will rise up and be thankful. Thank you all for listening in, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.